So Nick, really looking forward to getting into the first of this three-part short series. We're going to be discussing the value chain in financial services, financial advice in particular, looking at how that value chain has evolved over the years, and I think most importantly, what the future holds for financial advice businesses. I think when we're talking about the value chain, we can agree there's three core components to that. One being the financial advisor business, two being the investment platform, the third being the investment solution that sits behind it. But I think what's really great is we kick off with obviously your experience. You've had a lot of experience in and working with financial advisors, and it would be really interesting to get your insights into the mechanics of those deals, both the good and the bad.
Well, I guess before, just for a bit of context, I think it's always really important to establish what I think financial advisors do. And financial advisors do what I call the three hardest things to do in financial services. Number one, they keep clients for long periods of time, extended periods of time. I can think of no other industry where client satisfaction is high for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. I think point two is, I think that advisors also acquire new clients continually. And if you think about all the other parts of the value chain you mentioned in financial services, you talk about the platforms, you talk about investment managers, the challenge they always face is a new client acquisition. And in fact, advisors are doing that continually. In fact, when I talk to a lot of advisors don't want any more clients. They actually want, they've actually got enough clients and want to support those. And the third thing they do is keep clear of the regulator, i.e., run efficient, compliant, run businesses. Now, you think those things through, they are fundamentally the most important thing in the whole financial services ecosystem. But I tell you that for context, because when we go into the valuation metrics, it's quite surprising when you kind of explore those different parts of the value chain. So if we were to look at financial advisors in the first instance, again, been involved in both the acquisition. I was involved in an acquisition of a network and was then involved in subsequent acquisitions. Conversely, I acted on the side of advisors that were looking to sell their business to other acquirers or consolidators. When you look at that, you get different views, different insights. So what's interesting when you get specific into the valuations, financial advisor businesses are valued at 6 to 7 times EBITDA, which is profit, as a proxy for profit, but also, or 3 to 4 times revenue. Actually, bizarrely, when you do the calculations, it ends up about the same number typically. So that's kind of how the advisor business is valued. But what's less well known in the marketplace overall is what platforms are valued at, or even investment management, discretionary fund management groups. When you start looking at the platforms, it's a completely different model. Well, in some elements, a completely different model. It's purely a revenue-based analysis. So the platforms that have sold in the market in recent markets, we don't want to mention any specific names, but ultimately they were broadly around 3 to 6 or 7 times revenue. So that's the model. So you think about the scale of some of those businesses, that's extremely large numbers based on revenue, but bizarrely profit seems to be less of an issue, and there's a lot of consolidation, as we know, going on in the platform space. But then when you start getting into fund management groups and investment management companies, it can be quite a big variance, but what you're really looking at is somewhere between kind of 12 and kind of 16 times EBITDA, which is a profit again. I mean, when you think about that, that's huge, in terms of the of the levels. But that mismatch between the financial advice business and the investment management business or platforms can actually be huge. And what a lot of people kind of don't focus on very much is those financial advisors are the people providing those flows to the platforms and to the investment management companies. So in essence, acting as distribution for those groups. So if you keep playing that through, what that means is ultimately the clients of the financial advisor are helping boost the growth of the other companies to a greater multiple than the advice business that's providing them. Seems quite unusual, quite sort of slightly confusing, and doesn't often make a lot of sense. And I've not even started on the risks.
Yeah, I think the risks, I was going to touch on that actually. The financial advisor, going on what you're saying there, is obviously valued typically less than the other components of the value chain, but the advisor is taking on all of the risk, aren't they? So they're taking on the risk of the client suitability, they're taking on the risk of running the CIP, they're taking on the risk of any legacy DB transfers, things like that. They're also taking on the risk of the investment performance overall, because even though in many cases they're not running the investment solution, they're still recommending the investment solution to the clients. So they're taking on a lot of this risk, and actually, as you're saying, it's not really reflected in the valuation of their business. And all the while, as you say, they are then feeding asset flows to other parts of the value chain, and almost giving that away. So I think if we look at it like that, is it fair to say then that there's an angle advisor businesses are undervalued?
It kind of depends, but just before I again get into the specifics of that, I'd just like to mention, really elaborate on what you said about the kind of DB transfers. I think DB transfers have been a real hot issue in financial services. The PI implications for DB transfers for the industry as a whole are huge. If you use DB transfers as a great example to work through the value chain that we just mentioned, those DB transfers were great for financial advisor businesses. It improved their initial fees and improved the ongoing fees for those businesses. So to all intents and purposes, a really great thing. It became extremely difficult to get professional indemnity cover, and secondly, that then had an impact on the valuation because, as you and I know, a lot of advisor firms, sales fell through because of that implication. But what were the implications on both the platforms and those investment management companies for DB transfers?
Yeah, they got all the assets.
Exactly, without the risk. So it's really important to kind of re-emphasise this. This is, I guess, a lot of the conversation we're having is around how do we kind of address this kind of mismatch that's there. But sorry, in answer to your question about our advisors undervalued, the answer is it depends. Personally, I believe financial advisor businesses are undervalued because, I think there's a lot that can be done to improve their current valuation as it stands today. So I think that's one side of it. But the other side of it is we've seen a number of consolidators, and we're seeing a growth in the number of consolidators and acquirers doing that. And the valuations of those businesses are incredibly high. So I guess the answer is maybe the advisor businesses that are there are in fact potentially undervalued, but the advice businesses and the consolidators are probably fairly valued.
Yeah, so something actually I really did want to talk to you about as well is the client. So let's think about the client in this scenario as well. Something that I've become acutely aware of throughout my career is actually the client's perception of the different components of the value chain, advisor, platform, investment solution. And ultimately, as we all know, the client's main focus and consideration and what they care about the most is the relationship with the advisor. Clients aren't that interested or don't concern themselves too much with the platform that their solution sits on. They don't concern themselves that much with the investment solution, so long as obviously it continues to perform. Again, if you ask the client who they value the most as well in that relationship, we all know the answer.
Yeah, I think advisors are looking at kind of their businesses in quite granular detail at the moment and exploring kind of all the different ways they might be able to optimize or make more efficient their business overall. So I think main areas I think we're seeing that people are looking at is kind of all levels of the tech stack, from their back office system through to their platform, but also they're focusing a lot more on reviewing their centralized investment proposition. The advisor is the most important part of this value chain, but actually what we need to do is make sure we recapture some of that value or bring that value back into those advice businesses, because there's kind of a mismatch that we've seen there. And I think and often it's a centralized investment proposition is an area of focus that obviously we've had with many advisors that we've spoken to. But I think overall advisors are, in light of these kind of client changes, and in light of the fact that we all know the advisor is the most important part of it, what we're going to see and what we're going to explore, I guess, in our next kind of conversations is kind of the evolution of the advice process and also ways and strategies to help advisors bring some of that value back to their business.